Obviously, there are some differences when you're talking about Edtech market for K to 12 and for higher education. But I'll give you a sort of overview first. In terms of government, right? In terms of the government in Southeast Asia and ASEAN especially, right? Right now, I think the key, because of the pandemic that happens, and of course the post-pandemic world, I think the most important thing is what they are facing and what the tenders are coming out is really focusing on mass quality and safe learning at scale during the post-pandemic world. Because they realized during the pandemic that how do I make sure there's learning continuity and quality learning continuity, even if students are not going to the campuses or school. So they want a system, they want a solution that actually allows for the same kind of quality learning experience online or hybrid learning at mass and within one ecosystem. I think the current challenges right now for them is that in the market, there's a few different systems doing one separate part of that. So there's a lot of tenders coming out in Singapore especially, and also in Southeast Asia recently, that focuses on integration and consolidation of different systems, whether it's a learning management system, combining with a student management system, and also combining with learning analytics system and assessment system. So there is a lot of integration services being asked, a lot of customization system or consolidation of these systems. So even if for example, they like one particular learning management system, they'll be asking their learning management system to actually scale it up to include assessment, to include learning analytics and all that. So that's what the first thing. Secondly is that I think a lot of governments are also very worried or very concerned about equipping current students with future skills, even at the K to 12 level. So learning about 21st century skills like critical thinking, problem solving, even life skills of communication and articulation and all that. It's not enough for students, for them to just teach students the academic content. It's also important to teach this soft skills content, because what they have found is obviously the research has shown that by 2030, about 80 to 90% of jobs that is traditional will be gone. It will be replaced by a lot of automation and machines. And it's about human being able to manage and being able to organize these different automation systems. And so there is a need for students K to 12 to be ready to go into higher education, to actually be able to be very well versed with upcoming technologies like machine learning, like data science, like the metaverse or XR technology, with analytics, and even with, I think, latest technology that's coming up that we saw now is about relational intelligence, which focuses on getting analytics and data on the fly and not from the slow cycle. That's the second important thing that the government is looking at. How do we equip K to 12 students with the skills? And then how do we equip graduates coming up from the higher education for the future world of jobs that exists? And then the third thing also is because of all this move towards maybe a digital or hybrid learning, another important aspect is cybersecurity. Because I think cybersecurity is also a concern right now, that even in a safe ecosystem, like within a school or within a higher education campus, online or whatever, there are cyberbullying happening. So cybersecurity technology is also another important thing that they're focusing on. So besides these three concerns, the other thing that is very important is focusing on XR, on the metaverse, because I mean, it's already been predicted that in the future world, a lot of these students, or even the higher education students, will be coming out into a world where the metaverse is ubiquitous. We will not just do learning there, we will be doing business there. So the importance of students being well-versed, being well aware of the metaverse in a safe environment in the metaverse is very important before they go into the world where metaverse will abound, like Meta, for example, or even like I think that the recent one is virtual land or something else is on the browser. So the technology has been keeping up, the 5G has been keeping up, so the bandwidth is also there for the XR universe to really expand into the metaverse. one thing about the metaverse is just an extension of the XR world before. But the only difference is that the metaverse is a world where people can not just be there and talk and collaborate, but also transact, do business, and perhaps do more than just exist in the virtual for fun, but also for real life kind of transactions. So that to me will be three key trends in the Edtech world, in the ASEAN market, or even in the world actually. Yeah. And of course, last but not least, just to highlight that machine learning or analytics will also become more and more prevalent, where it used to be that companies like many companies doing data mining and all that, giving first level insights. But now we are going beyond the insights into also predictive analytics, so that both educators, teachers, learners, administrators can actually use those insights to actually predict best behavior, best outcomes, and the best transactions. One of the most unique things is that in ASEAN, there is a lot of small players with very much cheaper costing, but not necessarily living up to the claims they make. So when I was working in a few different companies providing edtech solutions for ASEAN, and it's evident that the quality levels are differing from what MNCs provide and perhaps the local players provide. But a lot of the decision comes down to budget. And of course, when you are trying to fulfill tenders and all that, everybody will claim they fulfill, but you will often see that a lot of times it's just not really accurate claims. So in ASEAN, budget is still very important because, for example, in countries like Malaysia, for example, or even in Vietnam, where they are also depending on external money like the International Monetary Fund and all that, where budget is scrutinized very carefully. So you need to be very aware of the budget, and even cost international companies coming to ASEAN, they need to sort of rewire their pricing strategy, and they need to realize the realities here in ASEAN. It's a numbers game. ASEAN, because of the population, it is a blue ocean strategy because it's not mature. For example, in ASEAN, I think the only country that is very mature in terms of edtech is Singapore. But if you look at all the other countries, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's Thailand, it's not a mature market. There's a lot of gaps. So the strategy there needs to be a blue ocean strategy, need to be a population game where you reduce your subscription services and perhaps look at the numbers rather than just looking at maintaining your pricing that you have obtained in the US, Europe, or UK market, for example. So that's one particular criteria. And then secondly, I think relationship management is very important in ASEAN, especially. Of course, it's also important in the global field, but in ASEAN, it's even more important, especially in countries like Vietnam, in countries like Brunei, in countries like Laos, where some of them are coming up from a very central economy. So a lot of business transaction is done through relationship management. It's not necessary that you have the best solution that you get the tender awarded. It's about you being able to manage the relationship very well. And you also need to understand the realities of how decisions are made in certain countries like Vietnam, for example, where if you have the relationship with the central government, it's much easier for you to implement nationwide, for example. So it really is very important for anybody coming to ASEAN to understand the realities of the different markets in ASEAN. It's not uniform. It's not homogeneous. I think a lot of people tend to think that ASEAN is homogeneous. It's not. Singapore is different. Malaysia is different. Indonesia is different. And so we need to definitely do a lot of research on these countries before moving on. You need to understand the wallet share of the countries. You need to understand how, especially for K-12, how the parents make decisions, what will be the marketing or channel strategy. It's all different for different countries. For example, one country will a lot of the parents make decisions from TV ads with the popular people, with the popular figures. But in other countries, that wouldn't work. So I think it's very important for anybody coming to ASEAN to understand the uniqueness of this region. Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. The biggest challenges is the realities of the business dealings here, that sometimes there are shenanigans under the table. That there is a lot of middlemen that also wants their cut. So companies that perhaps have a ethical or a certain policy about doing that kind of dealing with these middlemen need to understand the reality sometimes in certain countries that you need to actually, for example, give a certain margin to the middleman and all that. That's the first thing. I think the second thing for any region, for EdTech especially if you're trying to sell to K-12, it's not enough to just convince the management or the top people in the organization. In order to ensure that, especially right now, the importance of SaaS product or service as a solution product, where it's about subscription services. You can definitely sell a SaaS service for the first year, but for subsequent years, you need to actually ensure there's sustainable adoption of your solution. So the only way you can get sustainable adoption is there's effective use of the product. And the only way you get effective use of a product is to focus also on equipping the educators, the administrators, on how to actually use the products properly. So effective professional development is important. Effective post-training support is important. And also getting the buy-in from the users is very important so that your system will be effectively used. I've seen many examples in ASEAN where it's a nationwide or campus-wide or school-wide kind of implementation. But after the first year, because the adoption was very low, it was not continued for the second or third year. And even if somebody signed for a multi-year project or something, it can easily be cut off. Because at the end of the day, what all these educators want is, how does this solution or system actually ensure better learning outcomes, better educational outcomes for my school or for my institution? And even if they're not getting that, and the learners are not getting a good learning experience, then it will become a very short-term implementation. I think one of the key things is that how do you scale up quality learning in a hybrid fashion to really rise up to the challenges of the pandemic and the post-pandemic world. When the pandemic hits, a lot of governments were scrambling and there was not a lot of pedagogy. And instead, there's a lot of panic-gogy. There's a lot of panic, so get students on Zoom, get students on Teams or whatever, and where there's a lot of digital stuff, but the learning actually is not the same as normal learning. So the learning outcomes become very bad, and parents are seeing that students are not engaged online and so on. And so when you reach the assessment or the time when you have to do a summative assessment, you understand that the deep learning is not happening. So that's the first biggest concern. How do you ensure learning continuity, quality learning continuity, even in a hybrid or digital fashion? I think secondly, they are very worried and concerned that there is structural unemployment. When they are graduating the K-12 students, they are not ready for the changes in the higher education, and from then on, not ready for the future world of work, where a lot of the jobs, of course, like I mentioned just now, there will be about 70 to 80% jobs gone, but there will be new jobs being replaced, right? But these new jobs require new skills, and they are very afraid of this structural unemployment, where they need a certain A, B, C type of skills, but the students coming out into the working world are actually having D, E, F instead of skills that perhaps is more suitable for the traditional jobs. So that is their second concern and second. And then the third thing I think is that a lot of campuses, schools, whether K-12 schools or even for higher education, there is a lot of consolidation in terms of trying to maximize. For example, recently I worked for a different company that focuses on the ASEAN market, that focuses on the K-12, that they are buying different schools in every country and they're consolidating it into one banner, because they want to get the economies of scale in terms of dealing with the government, in terms of dealing with the vendors and so on. So there is a lot of consolidation happening, not just from the systems point of view, from the campuses point of view. So there's also that kind of concerns and implications that people should be looking at. The three biggest things to me is the hybrid learning, where people are focused on ensuring hybrid learning happens. So focusing on hybrid learning systems that provide synchronous asynchronous learning that provides analytics, that provide assessment, formative and summative assessment, and also providing that kind of data mining or insights from this data that's happening from the learning and also from the assessment. So that's one. The second one, the subdomain that is very important is the SaaS ecosystems. Like I mentioned just now, there's a lot of consideration for these different systems to come together, and a lot of customers like both the K-12 and higher education institutions are focusing on trying to get SaaS services rather than getting a system and then installing it locally on the campus, because they know that that is not sustainable. So the SaaS ecosystem is where I pay you for a certain service per student, and I then, because of the fact that I pay subscription every year, there's an upgrade, there is a development. I just need to pay the subscription and I get all the latest updates. Before, it was really focused on, oh, let's get the system for 3 years and that's it. And then we do our own updates and all that, but that's not sustainable. It's very expensive. So that's the second one. And then the third thing, I know that there's a lot of very sexy, very sexy technology like machine learning, metaverse and all that. But I think the very third one is about cybersecurity and about using blockchain to be able to ensure cybersecurity in the education system. For example, the digital certification that blockchain can actually do because of this consolidation that I talked about just now from different campuses and all that. A lot of students are coming online to actually get certificate, but how do you ensure that the people taking the certs are actually the person that is supposed to take it and whether it's all accredited? So digital certification services using blockchain technology is also something that they are looking at to ensure that across all these different campuses and school, the certification, the accreditation is actually sound. And of course, the other subdomains that I talked about just now, a bit more from the front end, will be the metaverse solutions and the analytics or data science aspects of it. Yeah. As an educator before myself, I think the kind of skills where students in ASEAN especially, right, a majority of them are used to actually didactic, traditional teaching and learning, where they are spoon-fed. What the teachers are saying, I will just follow and follow, right? So, but in order for them to thrive in the higher education world where people are looking at this kind of soft skills that I mentioned just now, they need to already change that in the K-12 pedagogy and curriculum. So the government is also looking at innovative pedagogical approaches that actually can be a balance between the traditional and the new, so that when students go into the higher education system, they are much more familiar. I'll give you an example. I was in an institution that focused on problem-based learning before, that was receiving students from the K-12 market at age of 16 years old, right? But they had, before that, they had about 16 years of traditional education. So even if when we were in the institution and we were introducing all these new constructive-based pedagogical approaches, it took about 6 months before the student adjusted to this new pedagogy where people are not spoon-fed the information, where you have to problem solve, where you have to critically think about how you actually want to solve a problem and apply the concepts learned. That will be the challenge for a lot of governments and to be able to have this year of transition nicely between K-12 and higher education to ensure a smooth transition. They call this a transition year or something in some higher educations, but this is an actual issue that they will need to grapple with in the middle term. Now, when we are designing some e-curriculum for students actually, and we are creating sort of a immersive land where students can learn and sort of have a gamification kind of virtual land, metaverse. I think one of the concerns that we are very aware of and we are sort of anticipating and we are learning as we are going along is that, of course, another big stakeholder in the K-12 market is the parents. A lot of the parents are, from their own experience are receivers of traditional education, right? So even in the example I gave you just now about a few years back when we were focusing on the new learning pedagogy for this transition between the K-12 and higher education, a lot of the parents are coming to us and say, where is the homework for my child? Because we are focusing on problem-based learning, right? Where is the homework for my child? And where are their books? What and are you sure they are learning? So I think another important step that a lot of governments or even partners or vendors in this world will need to address, especially if they are addressing the K to 12 market, is to ensure that parents themselves are aware about why we are doing certain things pedagogically and why we are using certain solutions pedagogically. I give another example. Before we introduced learner response systems in a particular school in Malaysia, and there was a parent day talk. So what we did was we actually share in the parents day talk why we are introducing certain technologies, and we talk about the realities of the future world and all that. So much so that the parents themselves, who are mostly experiencing traditional education, a lot of them came up to us after the talk to say, "Oh, wow! Now I know why you are doing this. Can you also do this for another program?" So I feel that it's very important for vendors in this market, in the edtech market for K to 12 especially, to actually also make sure that the parents are aware of the reasons and the benefits of actually introducing such technology to students. Because most of them are not aware why you are doing this. And so they thought the students are just exposed to technology and playing too much or whatever. But more often than not, if you explain the why and the rationale and how it links to the new skills and pedagogy and so on, parents will accept. Because a lot of parents in our age and so forth, we only know what we know, right? And we are not, if we are not in the edtech world, we would think that these guys are just playing all day on their digital devices or going to the laptop playing too much digital stuff. So that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is what I mentioned just now about cybersecurity. I think one of the other parents' concerns is, of course, about how safe is this virtual world or digital world where my kid are they going to expose to be cyberbullying and all that, which is even more dangerous than actual bullying because of the anonymity the digital world actually provides. So people become more actually much braver. They are blatant. So it's very important that the systems in place or the solutions in place also have a very good layer of security in terms of avoiding this cyberbullying and also ensuring that security is very safe so that you don't introduce unwanted elements inside the digital systems. So these will be two of my concerns that perhaps certain stakeholders in the K-12 market would have already sort of raised and also would continue to raise. Yeah.